Gentlemen, welcome to Kantipur Conclave 2022. We are now starting with the first session, Tackling the Climate Crisis. A big thank you to all our sponsors, title sponsors, NIC Asia, powered by Asian Paints, hospitality partner Hyatt Regency, international airlines partner Cathay Pacific, education partner Uniglobe College, home appliance partner Hire, e-commerce partner The Raj, green mobility partner BYD, insurance partner, Shikhar Insurance, and knowledge partner, BEAD. We are talking about climate crisis in this session, tackling the climate crisis. Something we have all felt these days and something we absolutely can't ignore anymore as the impacts of climate change have become palpable and dire. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to invite our wonderful panelists for this session on stage. May we please have Dr. Radha Wagle, Director General, Department of Plant Resources, on stage. Can we please give her a big, big round of applause? I'd also like to invite Alice J. Brooks, Senior Economist, Nepal World Bank Group. Delighted to already welcome two ladies on stage for this panel. Can we also have on stage Neha Kumar, Head, South Asia Program Climate Bonds Initiative. This panel is already looking very, very beautiful. May I please invite Dr. Sudeep Thakuri, Dean, Faculty of Science and Technology, Midwest University, Nepal, to join this fabulous panel. Before I hand over this session to our moderator and invite our moderator on stage, a reminder to all our distinguished guests here and who are watching us live through Kantipur Television HD and eKantipur to please download the app Events More, through which you'll be able to ask your questions. Ladies and gentlemen, please do join me in welcoming our moderator for this session, Ramesh Bhushal, Nepal editor at The Third Pole. Now, with the panel all set with our moderator here, may I please request our moderator, Mr. Bhushal, to take over with the proceedings of this session.
Thank you. Thank you all for being with us here. Wonderful panelists out there. I'm delighted to moderate this session. And the panel looks pretty interesting, majority with the female. That doesn't happen often, but it's good to see this happening. So let me start setting the scene on how we are talking about climate change at the beginning of this conclave. This wasn't a usual thing 10 years back, 20 years back, or 30 years back. So if you just take 30 seconds to look around yourself, you'll figure out how much we have produced, or the luxury that we have around, and those materials that we produced right now, the things we have been using right now, 95% of things around us wasn't there 100 years back. So whole history or the story of this climate came when we found an interesting thing called engine. The engine started so quickly, and it went around the world, shaping a lot of things, lives, societies, politics, and we were enjoying everything. Things were going well. We thought, we are developed, we are modern, but one more thing was happening in the background. The emission of carbon dioxide gas that was happening during that 300 years just did one thing. In last 300 years, or say 150 or 200 years, the world has warmed 1.1 degrees Celsius. We are living in a world, or the planet, that is 1.1 degrees Celsius warmer. If we just stop doing everything right now, the world is going to be warmer by 2 to 3 degrees Celsius. we don't exactly know what will happen in this scenario. We even don't know what is happening right now. If you see, we had a huge flood in Melamsi last year. There was a huge flood in Uttarakhand a few years back, and people in Pakistan are suffering right now. One thing that science has told us is more and more extreme events are going to happen. So that's where I think we are talking about climate change right now, because it is so urgent. In 1970s, there was a discussion around saying the Earth is warming. In 80s, people said, no, it is not warming. It is changing the planet. It is changing the atmosphere. In the starting of this century, people said, no, it is not changing. This is a crisis. It is moving from the change to crisis. And lately, people are saying, it is not crisis. It is emergency. Means you have to act right now. There is no way you can survive if you don't do. That is the story that came up, and we are here to talk about it. So where do we start then? It's a big question, right? Because everybody wants to be rich. If you heard our discussion that happened in the earlier hour, the whole thing is served by economics, money. When you found money, money was so good. Everybody was talking about money. People wanted to be rich. The richers want to be more rich. We are poor. We want to be richer. So everybody wants to be rich. Nobody is going to not talk about money. But lately, there has been interesting development happening. People have started saying economics, but green economics, or economy. So if you don't add green in front of economy, you are not going to be or surviving in this planet. You don't know what will happen. So just adding green won't solve the problem. You need to act upon it, right? And that's where this whole thing of debate is coming up. So I'll start this session from the point of money and then see how it works and then evolve around how we can move further, just not talking only about money, but also about ecology and environment. So we have an interesting set of panel. They were already introduced, so I don't have to introduce it again. So let me start with the World Bank, the bank of the world, which has more money, possibly. And if money is the origin of this problem, then we need to think exactly where we need to figure out and how to deal with that money. So let me ask Alice, the whole global scene and setting is moving up. People are talking about climate change. There is a sense globally that we need to act right now, but it is not happening. So if you downscale that whole global politics and discussions around and then move into a country like Nepal, where we are right now, where do you see the change happening? Because this trajectory of development is changing across the globe. If it is changing, it is going to change in future as well. So how do you just see this pattern of change and where we will be standing in our future?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. I'm just delighted to be here with my co-panelist and with you as the moderator. Thank you so much for having us here and participating in such an interesting conversation. I would add, just to kick it off, that while it was the search for profit that led to so many greenhouse gas emissions, the solutions are not all about money. And so I'll leave that as a teaser. I think we'll probably come back to that topic in the course of our discussion. But you cannot throw money at this issue and have it go away, is where I'm going at. And so first, what I think, the question that you pose is, where do we go from here a little bit, right? But I think to answer that, we also need to know what has been Nepal's development trajectory up to this point? What has been the paradigm that has brought Nepal to 2022 Nepal was elevated to lower middle income status in 2020. There have been very good gains in poverty reduction, in welfare improvements over the past decades. Is this same development paradigm going to carry Nepal forward in a future where climate change is more and more visible? So if you'll indulge me for a moment, I'd like to just speak about what we see as the drivers of development over the past 2 decades. Growth is not the best measure, or it's certainly not the only measure of well-being, but I'm going, as a macroeconomist, I'm going to use this as a proxy. And so it's been driven by domestic demand. Domestic demand has been composed of consumption and investment. In fact, Nepal has very high investment rates. How has that been financed? It's been financed through workers going overseas and sending back remittances. So this, in a nutshell, is part of the story of Nepal's development trajectory. Now, do we think that that paradigm is fit for purpose going forward? Really? If we examine climate change and how both the acute shocks, those are the floods, the landslides, the damage to bridges and crop fields, those are the acute shocks. But we also have the chronic shocks of temperatures grinding higher and higher, decade upon decade, for as far as the eye can see, basically. And those impacts are much more broad. They include the spread of disease vectors into areas of Nepal that have not witnessed them before. They include lower labor productivity due to higher temperatures and labor which cannot escape the heat as it gets so hot. And they include declines in agricultural yields if business as usual is followed, because the types of cultivation and the ways they've been cultivated in the past will be insufficient to meet the new climate. So then looking forward, and I'm not going to try to be exhaustive because we have so many great panelists that they can touch on other dimensions of development, there is an opportunity for Nepal to shift its development trajectory. There's an opportunity and there's also a challenge that I'd like to add kind of to be a little bit unconventional, unorthodox. The orthodox response is, of course, hydropower. But you know, Nepal has had one of the world's largest hydropower potentials for all of its existence. Why are we talking so much about hydropower today? Part of the answer to that is because neighboring countries are becoming so aware of their need for clean electricity that they are beginning to come to the table, right? And so this is the moment, this is the juncture at which Nepal can seize an opportunity. Because if Nepal builds enough hydropower capacity to supply the country during the dry season, it's going to overproduce in the wet season. And without an off-taker, without a purchaser outside of Nepal's borders, that becomes uneconomical. So the economic rationale now has been strengthened. And that's an opportunity going forward with climate change. However, this growth driver that I talked about, this remittances coming into the country, fueling domestic demand, fueling investment and consumption, that's a more difficult story. We don't often think of Nepal as being an oil producing or oil linked country in the positive sense, such that when prices go up, Nepal benefits. We know that Nepal does not produce fossil fuels. However, because so many of Nepal's migrants go to the Gulf states and go to countries where their prosperity is linked to the price of oil, the question then becomes, As oil prices fall, we estimate it will start happening towards the middle of the century as countries globally, worldwide, shift to renewable sources of electricity or fuel. Oil prices are going to decline, and they could decline quite significantly, something that's very difficult to imagine today with the war in Ukraine. And if that happens, the Middle East as a source of remittances may not be a viable paradigm going forward. So what then will be the source of foreign exchange for Nepal going forward? Well, yes, we talked about hydropower and how that's going to be a source of export generation, but there are many other untapped sources of foreign exchange receipts that Nepal can develop.
So Alice, I'll come back with where the opportunities are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your response. So I'll come to, I go to Radhaji. As a person who has been looking this climate story from the government where you are responsible to make policies, as the things are changing, things are going to change, things have already changed, but the way we are working hasn't changed a lot. So what is exactly not happening? If we have to add this climate component in our policy, if you had any kind of a process where we have integrated or mainstreamed this climate component into the existing developmental or the policy framework, where do you see we are, and what are the challenges that you have faced in getting this whole new story into the existing story?
Thank you, Rameshji. First of all, I would like to thank Kantipur Media Group for inviting me in this program and express my some of thought regarding this climate change issue in the globe. And I have been involved in climate change related activities since 1.5 years, and during that time I came to know about these issues and challenges associated with it. And I know Nepal in the stage of development, and we have a kind of thought that we need to develop it in a faster rate. But at the same time, we have some issues that are the climate change, poverty, and inequality. And I think some of the issues, the poverty and inequality, we understand from our perspective, but still we have to know the perspective of climate change, how climate change is impacting our economy, our development, and how it is a barrier or opportunity for our development. That is a huge understanding, but that is still lacking. But in terms of policies, we have so many policies to address it. We have developed the policies. I think there is some influence from international donor communities as well. Support, I don't want to say that this is influence, that is support from international communities. And we have developed some policies so far. But still those policies are not came into action, because climate change is not the unilateral issues. It has a cross-cutting issues, so that we need to know the sectoral impact of climate change. We need to have the future perspective and future impact of climate change in different sectors. We need to know how climate change is impacting our future, our development, but still that is lacking. And the sectoral integration is still lacking, and even the sector who are responsible for making plan, implementing, we have lacking the capacity to understand that. We have lack of the human resources as well to understand the impact of climate change, how it is impacting our communities, how different section of communities are impacted. For example, climate change has not the same impact to all the communities. all the people. Maybe Rameshji is impacted differently and I am impacted differently, because it is all about the resource dependency. Who is dependent upon what type of resources? That is the understanding we know for making the policies and for making the program and to implement it. Still we have lacking that thing. And even we have some understanding about this and we have the policies, we have lacking of financial resources, we have lacking of technology to tackle it. We have some traditional practices to cope with the climate change, but that are not sufficient, because the change is so fast and the disaster-related events are growing so fastly, and last year's the IPCC report is so alarming that we need to face more disasters in future, and that is maybe beyond our capacity to cope with. That's why we need to have understanding in political level, in bureaucratic level, and local level differently, and we need to act accordingly, and that is the lacking.
So exactly the question is, now, if we have a policy in place that you think is something that we can work on, so why is it not working then? Is there a problem in bringing that policy, or we didn't know how to devise that policy and implement it? Because this is a common story across the globe in the least developed countries where there are so many policies. The focus towards policies is so high that in the ground, the needs are not being assessed in a way. And then more focus has been towards the mechanism. Do you think that is a problem, or that isn't?
Yeah, that is true. But our focus is more in policy making, but the equal focus is necessary to integrate that policies into different sectors, because climate change is cross-cutting, and that is impacting all the sectors. And now we have 3 tiers of government. Before we didn't have that, but still we need to work in local level governments, provincial level governments. If we see from institutional perspective, there is some institutional mechanism in federal level, but still in provincial level and in local level, I think there is no proper mechanism to address the climate change. There is no institutional setup, proper setup to address the climate change. Even in the local level, the understanding and the institutional mechanism, the human resources, that is lacking so much. But we need that intervention, the intervention for climate change in local level. That is lacking.
Okay, I'll come back to you later. Sudeepji, as a person who has been doing science for long, you understand the process that is happening across the globe. And this region that we are is a region that has so less information globally, that even IPCC told that it is a black spot where we don't have enough scientific information to make a decision. Because for a better decision-making process, you need a solid science. So what is the status of the science in the Himalayas that we are part of? And then can you downscale it to Nepal and say what is exactly in the ground that you can feed in to policymakers like Radhaji, who has to bring in policies that are implementable, right? So are we somewhere in a good shape, or where are we? Where do we stand actually in science?
Thank you, Rameshji. First of all, I would like to thank Kantipur group for this opportunity. Definitely, we are in the time of accelerated climate change, right? And at the global scale, if we talk the science of climate, climate change is very clear. And after last year, when the IPCC released its scientific basis report, we are very highly confident that the climate is changing, right? And there is no any questions right now. Regarding the global scenario, actually the temperature is changing by almost more than 1 degree Celsius since the pre-industrial time. And actually the IPCC, they were suggesting for limiting the 1.5 degrees Celsius. So that is actually the scenario. But when we talk about the Himalaya region, the 1.5 degrees Celsius, if we talk about the 1.5 degrees Celsius, if the global temperature changes by 1.5 degrees Celsius, the Himalayan region itself is actually experiencing more than 2 degrees Celsius because of its topographic context, because of the elevation dependence of the temperature rise. So that is actually the case. And due to this, by 2060s, overall the glaciers in this region will lost by 2/3, right? And if we talk about the Nepal, and if I express my research finding also published, because since last several years, I'm doing particularly understanding the climate trend and how it is impacting to our different components, you know. So actually the temperature of this region, you know, is definitely rising. Nepal itself is experiencing almost 0.4 degree per decade of temperature rise. And if we talk about the precipitation is actually, we have very uncertainty in the precipitation term. But what we can expect from the ground stations that we have data is the precipitation actually is decreasing over the region, but the precipitation timing, that is actually, becoming very uncertain actually. Sometimes we feel very rapid, you know, and a huge amount of precipitation at the time, and sometimes scarce, you know. For example, if we talk about the drought in the Europe, and also in the Himalaya, no?
So my additional question is, now, as you said, things are changing. How hard it is, or how is the science, you know, playing around in the region? Are we doing enough science, or what are we exactly doing? What do we exactly need to do then with this global and regional scenarios saying the rainfall pattern will change? Yes, definitely it is changing. The temperature is rising. Yes, it is rising. But we also need the microscale information to do any kind of developmental work, right? So are we doing the micro level science as well, or we're just circulating whole this regional and the global science? Where are we exactly when we talk about the micro level science?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. After the I would say 2007 IPCC report, actually until that time this region was considered a really white spot, data gap region. But after that, the scientific community actually they engaged their concentration in this region, and I would say as a science perspective that this region is gaining more scientific data recently, especially on the temperature, precipitation changes, and how it is impacting to the different components. For example, this region is very important for the cryospheric perspective, right? And especially, there was very uncertainty in the cryosphere until, I would say, until 2010. But after that, actually, we have very good knowledge regarding this issue, right? But definitely, the climate change itself is a very complex and interconnected issue. So understanding it completely is very difficult. No? And all the scientific community, they are actually trying to understand different impacts in the different components. For example, water resources, right? Biodiversity here, and also the high altitude ecology, right? So actually, we are definitely getting some knowledge regarding the impact of the climate change. And actually, now the majority of the community actually, they are more focused on the how to address those impacts.
Okay, I'll come to you later. Neha, exactly how do we address it, right? So if you have to address anything, the first thing you need is money. Because without money, you are not going to bring in the solutions, possibly. I mean, you can do it, you can adapt, or you can try it, but so money is something that the world is looking. And money is the key of the global discussion as well. Yes, we understand that there is a historical injustice when we talk about climate change, because it is not a problem that we were part of, but this is a problem where we have to face together, and we'll have to face more. So as the world is moving towards climate financing, where do we get money to do it then, right? The richers are saying, we are also suffering, and our economy has another thing. They're also dealing with the problem. They are not willing to do or to pay to the developing countries as promised, right? So there's always a debate and fight between those groups. So as one who has been looking over how the economy can be leveraged, for example, right? Because there are so many ways to leverage economy, regional, private, international, multilateral. So as someone who has been looking over this issue, how do you see this climate finance moving globally? And regionally, where do you see the opportunities are? Or is there anything happening in the region that we could learn from or try to bring in?
Thank you, Ramesh, and thank you, Kantipur Conclave, for inviting me to this discussion. Since I'm the last speaker in the row of questions that you have posed, I also have an opportunity to reflect on what my other panelists have just spoken, and definitely the question of money is your question, and I will answer that. You started the panel by saying capital was the origin of this problem. Where we are landed today, it was our model of capitalism that has landed us where we are. You know, the extraction from nature without internalizing those costs and making that as part of your production and consumption patterns is exactly why we have landed. It has been an unbridled search for profits. Now you're asking me, can capital be the part of the solution, right? Or is the model of capitalism that we are following be the part of the solution? It's a very, very big question, and let us try to unpack this. What is happening in the sphere of climate finance is also a lot of things happening together. Okay, I'll come to that. But before I come to that, I'm again tempted to take something from our initial speakers, something from what you just said and the question that you posed about science, right? Here we are today because of the problem of climate change, that we have to absolutely believe in science, and yet whether science begins to be a part of political dynamics, policy formulation, and investment is a complex process. Today, what my colleague just told about, that if you did this, this will lead to this much, you know, science tells us, but for a normal person who's poor, that science is not a big thing. They want to, especially in this part of the region, globe, are focused on whether they'll have 2 square meals a day, whether they can actually support their families for education, for health, etc., etc. So science being at the center of this problem and the solution also has another aspect of what, Radha just talked about. It is poverty, it is inequality, it is about making lives livable, in this region. Making lives livable and improving the quality of life is also a central question of climate impacts and climate change, and of money. Many churns or transitions are happening at the same time. You talk about political, you talk about social, you talk about industrial, you talk about financial. All of that is happening at an extremely fast pace, and especially within emerging economy, within the South Asian context, the impacts of it and even the solution part of it is very palpable and can be extremely important for the global solution that we are looking for. Having said that, in the morning, Professor Menon said that South Asia is the center of gravity of geo-economic and geopolitical changes, that we are between orders. The past world order and the new world order is a huge amount of churn. That I would say climate change is at the center of that debate now. Environment is at the center of the debate now. People are at the center of that debate now. South Asia will be at the center of that gravity as well. And then coming back to, say, a country like Nepal, which is a small economy, but is facing similar problems, perhaps in very, very higher degree. I mean, it's perhaps the 7th most vulnerable country by climate impact. Whether it has the means to make certain changes that we have all talked about is the question that now finally comes to finance, because finance is basically a means to getting to an end. You talked about green economy. Green economy by its volume stands at about $7 trillion globally, right? In all of that, how does Nepal really look at that? I mean, am I a part of green economy? What do I do? I'm a small country, right? Actually, you just start scaling it down and you begin from enterprises, you begin from businesses. Does climate change make sense as a business value proposition? And we have seen, and talking yesterday to some entrepreneurs over here, private sector people, they said they understand it. They understand the materiality of climate change. They understand that, okay, if I were to improve my processes, I will be more frugal with my resources. I will be more frugal with my energy consumption. Where is my energy coming from? Am I going to be dependent upon fossil fuel energy, for which I have to pay a huge cost, for the life of the business? Or can I invest in renewable energy sources? Can I improve the processes in my industrial sector, etc., even how I do my agriculture? So I think at the enterprise level, at an entrepreneur level, these things are the materiality of climate change as well as the business case of climate change is pretty clear. What we are talking about is whether the system, the financial policy itself, whether the sectoral policies can actually enable that private enterprise go the path that is environmentally sustainable and also achieve value. So here, I mean, I know that you are...
Yeah, so I'm the moderator, so I have to just look at that what's there. Sorry for that. I'll come to you later on how that policy can work on, or is it working, or is there a way out, or is there example where working? So before entering the whole private enterprise and individuals who has to invest, because investment, you have to secure an investment, right? So there is an additional burden, isn't it? Because your investment is not going to sustain if you don't add that climate component to yourself as well, and that is your responsibility at some point of time. But the whole global debate still now, and is still in Nepal, is that whether we should invest our money or we should ask money from those people who emit it, for example. The historical injustice there is. So should we wait for them to give money, or should we start doing something by ourselves is a debate that is happening. Where do you see, is there a shift being, is the shift is happening, or people are still in that debate, for example?
I think that is, let's just begin from the beginning over here and say in one sentence, there is no time to wait. You will have to do many things simultaneously. Yes, historically and by evidence, you're not the emitter of the world that is, has caused the problem. No, it's absolutely untrue. And so your story is a story of not only reducing and growing in a manner that sort of decouples, because you're growing, you're a growing economy, and you will grow more. So how can you decouple emissions from your growth? That's the first question that you have to handle, and that's very much your question. That's very much your economic question. Second question is, I'm already logged into certain impacts. So am I able to reduce these environmental impacts in the manner I grow, right? That is the adaptation story. You're saying, is there a sequence of it that first we get the money from others, or do we do internally? I think do everything simultaneously. That is what I'm trying to say over here. Just give me a couple of minutes. Your budgets, how you are, and in fact, I was reading and I was talking to people. Nepal is doing some things very, very interesting. It already has a climate budget tagging process. Okay, it is already, for the energy sector, I think there is also an external commercial borrowing flexibility that now the central bank has given to you. It is looking at doing its agriculture slightly differently. So you're doing things. The question to be asked is, are you doing enough or at the pace that you're required to do? There needs to be a sense of acceleration, even how you mobilize finance domestically. How do you look at, say, a plethora of institutions, including multilateral development banks, to be able to get international capital in? How do you improve your lending systems, your banking system, so that there is a preferential investment strategy that the government, that the private sector commonly can see that this is where Nepal requires, and this is what is required to be done. Just closing with one sentence, this will not be possible without having both sectoral transition pathways where you're going in different sectors, as well as financial policy pathways that you will need to put in place.
Thank you. I'll go to Alice. So Alice, as someone from the World Bank, the banks want to give more loans rather than grants, for example. So, or not, I don't know. I mean, what is your priority? But the whole thing is, in locally, if you have seen the debate in the last couple of weeks or a couple of months, people have been debating whether we should take a loan or not on climate change in Nepal. That has been a key point of discussion for last few decades. So, do you think there has been some kind of shift in that understanding that we should try to bring in money wherever possible, but focus on using that money effectively and wisely? So bringing money only doesn't help you to become resilient, right? Because if you don't invest it well, if you don't use it wisely, it is not going to help you. So as World Bank has also been the agency that is probably giving the climate loans to Nepal, possibly, do you see this is something, this will hamper the whole process of financing in the country?
Thank you. The World Bank has not given a climate loan to start. But I really enjoyed, Neha, the way that you framed the discussion. You can have discussions on all fronts. You could have discussions about climate justice, and you can look at what is within Nepal's manageable control right now and don't wait. I think the tragedy will be any country that waits to take action. There's not some outside force or organization that has the wherewithal for any of us. I have my own country struggling with climate change. And the internal advocacy is that we cannot wait to take action in any country, whether it's Nepal or whether it's the United States or elsewhere. The World Bank is doing a lot of analysis, which is not alone. And there are immediate actions that we are discussing with both the government and civil society and other development partners, and I'd like to get very specific here for a moment. What is something or the things we believe that within the next 5 years could be done here within Nepal, by Nepal, to help adapt to climate change, right? And it's going to build off of some of the things that Dr. Wagle also mentioned previously. First is an integrated approach to water, agriculture, and forestry. One of the manifestations of climate change is a change in where water is and where it is available, and water storage solutions are very critical to this issue. Integrating that with agriculture to provide reliable irrigation is also very crucial. And sustainable forestry as well, to continue on Nepal's good success in the forestry sector. So we have the landscape management is one area. The second is hydropower. I think we've all talked about that. There will be another session on it. The third is sustainable urbanization. Nepal is the fastest urbanizing country in South Asia. And cities are having a hard time keeping up with the delivery of services, and that's having climate impacts. Solid waste management is a critical issue, and we know that very well in Kathmandu. Also transport, public transport and private transport. And then the fourth is resilient connectivity. If you have a bridge or a road that washes out every 24 months, you're just wasting your money to rebuild, unless you build back better so that it's hardened, so that you have the gullies and culverts necessary to control, to maintain the infrastructure when a severe event occurs. One of the opportunities that Nepal has is your nascent federalist system, the establishment of 3 tiers of government. These systems globally take decades to roll out and perfect. Nepal has made tremendous strides in 5 years. But as Dr. Wagle mentioned, the need in one part of the country is not the same as the need in another part of the country. And local needs need local solutions. Many of the issues that I've mentioned are not putting more money towards the issue. It's about communication, it's about enhancing decision-making, it's about autonomy at local levels, it's about enabling those officials at any tier of government to take the decisions that are necessary without hesitation and to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't say you give the loan. I'm saying the whole process of getting loans, wherever from. But there is a huge debate going on, not including the agency, but it is all about from where to take the money or how to take it. It has been a debate. Thank you for clarifying that. There are a few questions on there. I'll just give one, ask one question to Radhaji, and then I'll move to questions. So one thing is happening right now. So everybody has got this climate change to say, oh, I mean, something bad happened and climate change did it, right? So a lot of the governments and others are trying to hide their bad action, inaction, or no action, saying, I couldn't do anything because it was done by climate change, right? So is government also using this tool, to just hide your own inefficiency, incapability, or your bad actions?
Thank you very much for this question in particular, because that is not true. We need to realize our bad action too, if we really want to address climate change issue, not only the climate change issue. I already I mentioned 3 issues in the country that currently hindering us for the development, what we intended, our intended development. The first one is inequality. The second one is poverty, and third one is climate change. We need to see them in an integration. The climate change is imposed issue, but the other one is our issue. We need to work on that, and we need to address it properly. I don't want to validate that thing, everything is climate change. But whatever the reason, we need to see the development perspective. We need development, we need our people's prosperity, and we need prosperous life. And then we cannot blame the climate change, we cannot blame the international community. We need to look at ourselves, and we need to correct ourselves as well. Thank you.
Yeah, we need to definitely. But will we?
Sorry?
Will we do that? Or are we doing it?
We need to do it right now.
So thank you. So there are a few questions I'll see some of them and start asking you. Any of you can answer questions. Susan Lama said, talking about hydropower, hydro energy and electricity for green climate, how do we address lithium batteries which are more hazardous to climate?
Can I address this?
Yeah, so as he's saying, we are talking more about hydropower, renewable energy kind of thing, but we aren't talking about the lithium batteries because we are shifting from this whole fuel system to batteries. So are we also thinking about handling those batteries and their implications or their effects to the environment or for us?
Very interesting question, actually. Definitely, every action, human activities that have impact on our environment. But the extent, how much impact that have on our environment is important questions, I think. So, what is actually the use of the fossil fuel is emitting more emissions, or the production of the lithium battery is emitting the more emissions, and that directly have impact on our climate system, right? So actually, that is actually we should consider from the economic and also environment perspective, both perspective. Definitely, yeah, when we talk about the energy also, hydropower is not the clean energy. We should remember everyone. There is definitely certain emissions from the hydropower. But compared to the fossil fuel, it has 60% less emission compared to fossil fuels. So that's why we are proposing the hydropower instead of other fossil fuel. Likewise, we need to actually, exactly on that perspective, we need to have science and evaluate its efficiency and the environmental contributions, right?
Oh, thank you. Let me go to another question by Rupesh Joshi. He says, since we talk about climate crisis all the time, only in news and conclaves, why climate change issues and necessary steps for sustainable life is not addressed in educational curriculum for children in school? Policies to address these important lessons for better life is not addressed for school kids who can actually learn and adopt to sustainable way of life more easily. Who would like to answer this?
You're the policy maker. Dr. Wagle.
Okay, that is also a good question. And we, in our NDC, we also mentioned that we need to have the climate change curriculum in our secondary level education. Of course, we are working on it. That's why I already mentioned every sector has some responsibilities because of its cross-sectionality. We need to have climate change related subject matter, climate change related program in sectoral approach. I think that is the one of the sectoral approach we need to integrate in our curriculum, school level curriculum, right from the beginning of maybe the children can also learn about the climate change. We need to educate them from.
Has there been some initiations?
Yes, yes. In Dolakha district, Charikot municipality, we recently pilot one curriculum for primary level to secondary level. That just started. That is the piloting.
Okay, thank you. So there's one more question by Tyler Durden. It's been widely accepted that the global warming and climate change is completely deteriorating the world we are living in. The mountains melting, ice caps breaking in, and the recent flooding in Pakistan is the evident examples. Although a lot of effort has been put into it, the severe damage has been done. How would the Earth be for the next 50 years, and would that be livable like it used to be? Yeah, I think you could answer, and then Sudeep can add, or anyone can.
Yeah, I think everybody has to add to this question. I'm an optimist. I think that, yes, we're going to have a livable world. I think that humans are incredibly adaptive. I think that that is the kind of energy we need to bring to this, because we need to take action now, correct? So in the case of glacier melting, working on water storage solutions, working on protections of hillsides, working on disaster risk management and preventive measures before the disaster starts, rather than attacking it or trying to clean it up after the event. All of those are within, we can take those measures. And I think that we will adapt to this changing world. We're in it already. We know that. It's not as though it's going to start tomorrow. It started years ago already, and we are adapting as we move ahead. So I'll allow my co-panelists to add their thoughts.
Please, anyone?
Yes, and I think what the question basically appeals towards is the sense of cooperation that is required in trying to address this change. I was reading somewhere that if you do not address, and right now talking only in the context of Nepal, is that by 2030, your GDP loss would be up to about 3% of GDP. You know, so that's the kind of economic loss that we are talking about. And then again, the loss part is when it is not only economic loss, it is the loss of livelihoods, it is loss of lives. All of that has to be integrated. And hence, I'm again reiterating the position that climate change cannot be and should not be looked in isolation. It has a deep connection with food security, with water, with energy. So the circularity in that sense of economic system, within the economic system, is actually at the crux of climate change debate and financing and tackling it. Just to give another lens to the question is that if there are so many risks and how would we live in the future, is to actually see it from the opportunity side. You know, and I'm again coming to some numbers over here because, you know, going back to your question, can capital play a part in this? There is around 50 billion USD worth of opportunity lying in front of Nepal sectorally. You know, these are assessments given by the IFC, you know, where concrete investments can be made. Now, how do you structure your investments is a second question. But do you recognize these investments? Are they credible enough? Going back to science, are they credible? So there is already, I think, a process in Nepal which has started on defining what these investments could look like. In our parlance, we call them green taxonomy. You know, things like that. There is enough happening in your region, in India, in other countries, in developed countries, through the financial system globally. And the main thing that comes over there is that, okay, if we have to direct our investments, whether that be loans, whether that is private sector investment, whether that is, you know, equity, whatever it is, we need to know what these investments, how do you define these investments? And I think if Nepal has taken that initiative forward, organizations like Climate Bonds come out with these criteria, come out with these definitions. There is a lot of opportunity available for technical cooperation, around. So it is not only about taking foreign debt in, it is also about really diving into all of those places where you do not have to reinvent the wheel, but you definitely have to put your contextual priorities in that framing of the question and say, okay, if there are certain scientifically defined definitions that form the baseline, that let us try to adopt that, and let us try to see how then the question of poverty, job creation, access can be also an add-on or an objective to pursue alongside the green investment.
Thank you.
Definitions.
Sudeep, where do you see we'll be in 50 years?
Really uncertainty. For example, we have seen the hockey stick diagram, right? That is available in the IPCC assessment report, right?
What is
and
that?
The uncertainty is really high. But definitely, when we see the current situations, we will not definitely far from the current situations. That means for example, the extreme events that is happening probably will also be happening on that time. The frequency of those extreme events may increase, right? That is actually the science tells about all. So to address these issue, definitely we need to prepare ourselves. Yeah. So when we talk about the preparation, there is actually the both, whether we have adaptation process or the mitigation process. At that time, since this climate change itself is very uncertain issue, and it is hard to predict the future, we need to have some adaptation strategies to address those issues actually.
So we need to adapt. The change in climate is what has been told. Even if we stop emissions right now, the Earth is going to be 2 to 3 degrees Celsius warmer, which means you have to adapt at least for that. Forget about 5 or 7, because the world is not going to stop emission right now. We know this. And it will not stop in next couple of decades as well. But I think the whole story is people are searching some alternatives wherever possible. And that is where the hope lies, saying, if we go electric, what will happen? There was a question saying, if the whole world goes electric, what will be the impact? There was one question by another participant, Alpa Sakya. So do you see that thing will happen, the whole world going electric? And how do you see this scenario?
Let me ask for some clarification. Going where? The whole world doing adaptation, adapting to climate change?
So if the whole world says we'll just not use fossil fuel and goes electric, and use all this transportation and everything electric, where do you see that would lead us, that will save us or not? Or that's just a single question?
I would frame it a little bit differently, because I don't think next year or tomorrow the technology is going to be ready for emissions to completely stop. Technology is catching up. Solar technology was very expensive, it was very inefficient, even just 10, 15 years ago. Today it's affordable, today it's much more efficient. So the technology, and going back to the lithium battery question as well, technologies on storage have to improve as well for the world to shift completely away from emissions. I think the story here is adaptation. I don't think the story, especially the focus in Nepal, needs to be primarily on mitigation. It's an adaptation story. You didn't cause this problem. The world is not going to, emissions will fall, but they're going to fall gradually. It's not going to be overnight. One day we'll wake up and emissions, we're back down to pre-industrial levels. So the adaptation story is where it's at. I think that's where humans are most creative. And I believe that there is so much that can be done, and we have roadmaps. Now the ability, the political will of taking the decisions that are necessary, that's the next step.
Okay, there's one more question from Shekhar Chetri. With increasing temperature, water scarcity is starting to be witnessed everywhere in the world. Nepal having the good natural source of water, do you think water will be the opportunity or curse for the country? Because more floods, more landslides, the pattern is changing. A lot of things are changing. Do you see water as an opportunity to deal with the climate change, or it is something we could call curse because we have so much? I mean, we don't have so much around us, but we see water. So how do you see this question as something we should think about, or what do you think?
I think it's of course opportunity, because in our NDC as well, we have intended to produce 15,000 megawatt of electricity that is intended through the hydropower. That, of course, that is from the utilization of our water resources. And we can also manage the water for the irrigation, for drinking purpose. We have opportunities here. Even we can export our water in a bottle. Why not?
Okay, Sudeep, we have water resources, but we shouldn't forget that it demands a lot of money to produce electricity. But if there are so many extreme events going on, and if you don't prepare for them, then your investment will go in a second. It happened in Melamsi. If it happens in Tamankosi, we don't know what will happen next year. So are we also thinking about, I mean, are we making a solid scientific knowledge to back up that investment, to protect ourselves from that kind of climate crisis or the extreme events? Do you see it is happening in, or have people started to talk about?
Yeah, actually, every development project, before their implementation, they have a risk analysis, right? And they actually develop their projects based on that analysis. So in many hydropower projects, actually, I have, while consulting them, they have actually considered those aspects also. But definitely the uncertainty is uncertainty. Sometimes extreme events that can have devastating effects. For example, the Melamsi events, right? There was actually the analysis of the risks, but that actually failed, I would say, no? So that can happen, and that can actually, in fact, cannot be prevented, I would say. That is actually the cases. But definitely the water resources itself is very great opportunity, and since long we are talking about the rich country, you know, and but we are very unfortunate to trap those resources, right? It has been several years right now that we are talking hydropower development. Definitely last few years, the progress has made very well. But
yeah, Neha.
I would just simply say that this region is highly water stressed and affected by disasters, right? So, I mean, there is no way that you can unlook water both as a risk as an opportunity. And there again, the idea would be that how do you manage water resources? How do you manage your water tables? I mean, it doesn't mean that your rivers getting flooded, that your water tables are doing right. You know, it's completely, it's extremely important. How your agricultural practices change, how do you make your reservoir systems better? And I think here, I will just like to make one point, which at least to my mind, should find traction in a small economy like Nepal, which is also trying to become resilient. I think decentralization of some of these projects would be highly necessary. You know, so whether it is energy, I mean, is the access of energy being looked at, especially when it comes to water systems? Big dams have their own very, very attendant risks, not only of, dislocation of people, but also environmental risks, right? So I think as far as water is concerned, I think we have to scale down from big to small, and see what kind of financial flows will be amenable, how can finance be made more amenable to reach those kind of projects. You know, sometimes what I also want to bring to each one's notice is that in an attempt to do big, you sometimes crowd out, you know, what is necessary to be done at a smaller level, but which will make much more sense as far as resilience is concerned. Today's paper, Nepal in Himalayan Times, I read, and I'll come back to an emissions and adaptation story.
But we have
also.
very less time, 2 minutes, so I think I should stop you in 30 seconds.
Yeah. I mean, Nepal has committed itself to being zero emissions by 2047. So again, when the government is trying to go aggressive, it is not a story about only mitigation or only adaptation. Okay, I think it is very much a development story, how you integrate climate and environment within your development strategy.
Thank you. I have 1 minute, 46 seconds. So if anyone wants to say anything in 45 seconds, I can give you.
I just want to add one more thing. Last year, we have done vulnerability risk analysis for all 9 sectors of our country, but we forget to mention or we forget to refer about those vulnerability risk analysis. I think we need to acknowledge the thing, a good thing that government has did, and then we need to build on that. If we follow that vulnerability risk analysis, maybe that will certainly help us our longevity of our hydropower development and any other development interventions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So I'll take 1 minute to wrap up. Thank you very much for your enlightening, informations, your views on climate change. I suppose this was put in as the first session because this is the most important issue for this conclave as well, because we got the first session. We are so fortunate. So thank you, Kantipur Conclave, for hosting this important session. Others are also important. Sorry, I'm just telling my thing. But thank you, Sudeep ji, Neha ji, Alice, and Radha ji for this wonderful presentation and your thoughts. So I do have 20 seconds. I should say thanks to all of you for being with us here, and then for those who have the questions, thank you for your questions as well. And then there's one suggestion given to us, and I just want to end by taking that suggestion. Since we talk about climate crisis all the time, only in news and conclave, sorry, I think there's, there's one suggestion I was reading. Someone was saying, oh yeah, so the suggestion was why we talk so much complicatedly, or we just make this issue so complex rather than talking about it easily. Like climate crisis is more workable when we adopt healthier lifestyle, good food, meaning green vegetables, save trees or soil, walk more, use less petrol or petroleum product, single-use plastic bans, wear cotton, not more polyester, or wear less clothes, in fact, for example. So there are some suggestions for the people who want to listen things in less complex way. Thank you for your suggestion. Definitely this story is going to be the story of the century, and it will be the story of the next century as well. So we don't know what will happen next, but I think we should be hopeful. Thank you very much for joining this session.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our chair. Thank you to our fabulous panel moderators for this engaging conversation on climate change. As they say the simple mantra of reuse, reduce, and recycle. Hope as the habitants of this earth and the being that's on top of the intellectual pyramid, we realize the potential that we have to change our ways for the betterment of this world and this earth that is not just home to humans, but also home to millions of flora and fauna. And hope in the next 10 years, like somebody said, what do we see the future as? But hope in the next 10 years, when we have more Kantipur conclaves, we can actually discuss on how we changed our habits, how we changed our policies, and took charge to turn around this climate crisis that we have in our hands. Thank you once again, and ladies and gentlemen, please to join me in giving a big, big round of applause to our panelists and our moderator for this fabulous session. Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, this is our lunch break. Please be back in this hall in exactly 12:55. 12:55 is the magic number I want everyone to remember so that we can start our session exactly at 1. Thank you very much. Please enjoy lunch. 1:55, yes, 1:55. Everybody's confused and looking at me, so my mistake, sorry. Please be back at 1:55. And we'll start our second session for Kantipur Conclave 2022.
साथी पनि राम्रो पनि
They say travel broadens the mind, but why stop there? Why not broaden the palette? Open your ears and your eyes. Your journey will take you many places, but here is where it all begins. The enhanced business class from Cathay Pacific. Let your senses guide you.
Vouchers, bank cards को फाइदा लुट्नुहोस्, डिस्काउन्ट माथि थप डिस्काउन्ट पाउनुहोस् केवल द राज दशैं धमाकामा। साथमा महाबम्पर उपहारमा न्यू इलेक्ट्रिक स्कुटर जित्ने मौका नछुटाउनुहोस्। डाउनलोड द दराज एप नाउ।
हायर को हैप्पी बायर, हायर को